Let's turn our attention to Europe, where US Vice President JD Vance gave a scathing address at the Munich Security Conference. He warned EU leaders that the loss of European values poses a much greater threat to the continent than external factors, including Russia. He spoke on a wide range of topics, including the suppression of free speech in Europe and the rise in anti-democracy sentiment, where the elite think they know better than the public. And here's what he had to say about the mass immigration that Europe has experienced.
No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration.
Dan, the Vice President's brutal honesty seemed to offend many of those in attendance.
It did, but I thought it was a groundbreaking speech, a necessary speech, and something that I think is going to shift the debate. I mean, we're in a new global order. As JD Vance said, there's a new sheriff in town, and basically if you want the protection of the sheriff, you're going to have to play by the new rules. You know, the US has been underwriting European defence for many, many years now, and sure, I mean, the United States gets a benefit from that as well, but, you know, Trump was pretty clear in his first incarnation that they're going to have to pay up. And now JD Vance is extending that by saying you've also got to revivify your culture. I think the most important thing that JD Vance said was the biggest threat to Europe is internal, not external. And that's not to diminish or downplay the serious external threats, but to acknowledge, well, if you've got a divisive political movement, mass migration, which is largely unchecked and against the interests of the mainstream of your society, in addition to the fact that you're running an anti-free speech censorship agenda, of course, people in your society are going to start pushing back. So I think Europe needs to get its own backyard in order before it starts telling the US what to do.
And this is something we've talked about on this station, on this program for years. It's Douglas Murray's book, The Strange Death of Europe. That came out around a decade ago. So what he was telling them shouldn't have been groundbreaking, but it was, because they just do not hear that, and they certainly don't hear that from the Vice President. Now, staying in Munich, there was another suspected terrorist attack. This time an Afghan asylum seeker is allegedly guilty of driving into a group of people, killing a mother and a 2-year-old child, injuring dozens more. And according to reports, the suspect came to Germany in 2016 when he had his asylum application rejected, but his deportation was also suspended, and he's obviously remained in the country. Counter-terrorism police are currently investigating. Dan, I suspect this will have an impact on the upcoming election.
Yeah, it will. I mean, it's just a terrible thing to happen. You know, having those children killed in such a fashion, and you know, I think it goes to the point we're just talking about in terms of the migration. The migration. I mean, this typifies the problem that he should have been deported and he wasn't. I mean, maybe he shouldn't have even been there to start with, but if he had reasonable grounds to be there, but then was found to, you know, have breached certain things and should be deported, well, why wasn't he? And you know, this gets to the bigger issue across Europe and across the Western world, which is this unchecked mass migration program, which does not have the consent of the community, is not only an economic and social problem, but is now causing serious issues from a potential terrorist perspective, as we've seen in Australia as well. So the more that this goes on and the less willing that political leaders are to confront and be honest about this problem, the worse it is going to get until there is a change of leadership in Germany and in other countries in Europe.
Now, there was another suspected terrorist attack in Austria yesterday. 23-year-old Syrian refugee has been arrested by police after he stabbed a 14-year-old boy to death and injured 5 others. The suspect was seen grinning as he was cornered by police. Dan, this is really bringing home what JD Vance was talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And look, people have known this for a long time, and you know, certainly migration has been critical to our society and many other societies for a long period of time. But when you've got situations like this, it's no wonder the public is turning against it. And none of us are saying, look, this is the problem of all the migrants or anything like that. But clearly things are getting much worse. I can't even remember it being like this when I was growing up. So, something's gone terribly wrong. And look, the fundamental point is multiculturalism has failed. When you don't have a majority culture, when you don't have a culture for new migrants to integrate into, then you're going to get enclaves like this of all kinds of people doing all kinds of things. So it's the responsibility of governments and civil society to reaffirm our majority culture and our values, and for that to be an integral part of any migration system.
Words matter, and we should be talking about having a multi-ethnic culture and being proud of that, because multiculturalism is something entirely different, and I agree with you, it's a failed project. Let's cross to New Zealand now. We don't talk about New Zealand often enough, but over there, members of a local church held a counter-protest during the Auckland Rainbow Parade, and then they gate-crashed an event where children, and we're talking here children as young as 2 to the ages of 10, were being entertained by trans activists. The counter-protesters performed this rousing haka. Dan, you could see the signs there. There are only 2 genders. Let kids be kids. Surprising to see this in woke New Zealand.
Yeah, well, there's nothing woke about the haka, that's for sure. I think when you sort of look at this, it's it's an example of what happens with what children are being confronted with in schools, and the clearly age-inappropriate nature of that, and the age-inappropriate nature of the events that you just described. And it's not surprising that more and more parents are starting to speak out as they learn about what exactly is being put in front of children. Of course we should let kids be kids. And nobody's saying you can't change your gender if you don't want when you're an adult. If you want to go down that path, then in our society that's up to you. But let children be children. Find an appropriate time and venue to present children with this kind of material. But too often it's being done by activists in an age-inappropriate manner, and until we get some common sense back in the education system and elsewhere, I just think we're going to see more of this.
And you're so right about the haka. I've always loved the haka, and if it wasn't being performed if it wasn't a Maori tradition, you can be sure they would have called it toxic masculinity and violent and aggressive, and would have somehow cancelled it. But they can't do that, and it is so powerful. It is really such a wonderful moment, whether it's done in a rugby game or at a funeral or at a counter-protest like that. Dan Wah, thank you so much for your time tonight.